Hello, it's Daniel with Slow Haste. In today's video, I'm going to show you how I take a sample from a synth and get it into the Digitakt, and then how I create a beat with that sample. I used a single sequence from the Microfreak for this particular video, and I kind of flipped it into like two different patterns on the Digitakt, and I'm going to play some of that for you just to give you an idea of where we landed before I go back and show you how we got there. So sit back and take a listen. Okay, so you may have noticed that those two patterns are a little bit disjointed, and that's because I kind of flailed a little bit when I was trying to come up with a beat with this sample, and I ended up making these two totally separate patterns that actually kind of ended up working well together, but I still need to work on it a little bit more, and this is definitely a work in progress, definitely not a polished product. All right, so the sample from the Microfreak, here it is. And we're going to head over to the Digitakt. And in your project, you're going to hit the sampling button. And you have some options here. We want to be able to monitor the sample. So we're going to hear that with the headphones, just like that. I'm going to arm it by just pressing yes. And the threshold is set so that when we play the sample, it will go over the threshold and record the sample. And that's what the waveform looks like. We're going to play it back by holding function and hitting yes. And we're going to get rid of that. That was just an example. So here's the real deal. And I played with the filter a little bit here. I didn't end up using too much of that in either of the patterns, though. So looking at the waveform on the Digitakt, again, we can play back the sample by holding function and yes. And if we want to save it, we just hit yes. And then we can rename the sound by holding function and mashing no to delete the default name, and then holding function and using the arrow keys to select our sample's name. And then we're going to save it. And then it's going to ask if we want to assign the sample to the track, and we're just going to hit no, because we're going to put it in later. Okay, so here I want to show you how I kind of came up with this first pattern. And this is just with the sample as is. Actually, I loaded my samples, the Microfreak samples, into a blank pattern so you can kind of hear them without any sort of affectation. So yeah, there's our sample. And I basically took that for the first pattern and I have it set up to just kind of repeat on a loop, but I edited it a little bit, I chopped it up a little. So I basically have it playing straightforward just through that first part of the waveform. And then for the last beat as like a pickup, I pitched it up and reversed it and then have little chops that just repeat to kind of do a little turnaround to get the beat started again. And that's how I started making this pattern. So I'll play that for you again with the kick. And now we're going to take out the sample and I'll just bring you through the percussion. So I started off with the kick. I knew I wanted to kind of build it to a 4 on the floor pattern, which we get to in the second half of this beat. It's a really quick turnaround. And then I knew I wanted my hats to have this kind of like echoey, stereo rich, laid back, but tight pattern. And this was feeling very like 80s to me for some reason. So for my toms and my snare, I took that approach. But you can hear that I decided to go crazy with the bit rate on the snare. Now that I hear it by itself, I might actually turn it down a little bit. So you got that very like, those like thocky sounds, I guess. I don't know how else to describe it. It just like has a lot of like to it. And it just kind of reminds me of 80s snares, that kind of like a gated sound, but a little bit more messed up. So here's it all together. I forgot, I put a melody on the top with this synth sound. And this is a, what is this? It's a blank form sample. But I just kind of cut off the melody because I liked the tone of the sound. I knew I wanted to use it for like a lead sound. And I just do a little run at the end of the pattern. So yeah, really fuzzy, kind of just like this quick little blurb. It feels complete. I couldn't really think of like where I would want that to go. I like how you can hear all of like the melodic parts in that chord sample. Like you have the bass, there's like a bass line in there. I didn't want to double that because I didn't want to overstate that. I like how the chord sample sits harmonically on its own. So I was feeling a little bit of writer's block with this pattern, and I said, okay, let's just try out another pattern, right? And I decided I wanted to flip the sample a little bit differently and kind of mess it up a little bit, play around with the waveform. And I came up with this little rhythmic bit. So yeah, just reversed it and threw like a lot of reverb and delay on it. Kind of sounds like a spring reverb with a combination of the reverb and delay I put on it. And I wanted to have that be like the rhythmic centerpiece of this pattern. So I'll play that with the kick. And you can hear there's some manipulation of that sample. So I basically just pitched it up. For some glitchiness. And I really like that. To me, the way this chord sits, you can hear that that sort of the lower harmonic. But I felt that it didn't stand as much on its own as the chord did in the first pattern, so I wanted to add a bass line. So I went with this. And that's also a sample of a single note from the Microfreak. It's one of the noise engineering engines. And I really like the sample, and I felt like it went with the vibe of this piece. So I used that for the bass note. I'm going to take out the melodic components here and just show you what I did with the snare and the hi-hat. There's my overly bit-reduced snare sound and my high-cut hi-hat sound. So I'm just going to play you these two parts. Actually, I'm going to play them individually because I want you to hear what they each do. and how they interplay. So that's the snare with the kick. And that's the hi-hat with the kick. So if you're ever concerned about only having 8 tracks on the Digitakt, don't be, because you can do so much with the parameter locking. It's amazing. So here, this is just the kick, snare, and hi-hat. Super happy with how that came out. I spent way longer than I should have programming and tweaking each of those steps on the hi-hat and the snare, but it felt right. So yeah, that's the second pattern that I came up with, and I really liked it. In fact, I liked it substantially more than I enjoyed the first pattern. And there are, you know, things that I liked about each of the patterns. And even such, this doesn't feel like the beginning of a song, right? It sounds like something that kind of comes in the middle somewhere. But so does this first pattern to me. So I guess that is to say, again, this isn't a completed track, and I definitely want to keep playing around with these two patterns to make them meld together a little bit more, and perhaps find an A part to the B and C part, because I really like the way this second pattern transitions into the first one. And honestly, vice versa. It sounds great transitioning to this pattern from the first one. But yeah, the short of it is that's how I get a sample from an external synth into the Digitakt and to play around with it. It's interesting to have like a melodic sequence that's pretty defined. And bringing that from one instrument into another, and then playing by like a totally different set of rules to use that as the foundation for a song. And I think in the first pattern, I definitely tried to use it as the foundation. And the fact that the sequence itself isn't necessarily something that you would start off a song with. It sounds like something that a song would build to. So I think that's why I wasn't totally satisfied with how the first pattern came out and felt like I needed something else to kind of mess around with. But I'm going to keep working on this one, and maybe you'll hear a finished product at some other point, and maybe I can make a tutorial on how I came to finish it and what other decisions I made. But I just wanted to make this quick video to show you the sampling process and how I go to compose from there. Anyways, that's it for today's video. If you're enjoying, definitely subscribe to the channel and check out my Digitakt playlist and my OP1 playlist if you want to kind of see my process of how I do these types of things on the OP1 too. But yeah, thanks for hanging out. I will see you in the next one. Peace.